So over the past few weeks, our focus in Ukraine has been on Kursk Oblast in Russia, where the Ukrainians are making gains every day in their incursion into Russian territory. It appears the Kremlin is internally focused on this as well, but it is up to its usual tricks, rolling out a carefully orchestrated message campaign aimed at convincing the Russian public why they should accept the presence of Ukrainian forces in Kursk Oblast as a temporary inconvenience rather than a major issue. According to the Institute for the Study of War, sources close to the Russian presidential administration have concocted a strategy aimed at conditioning Russian society to view this incursion as the new normal, while downplaying its significance. The plan is to use propaganda to convince the Russian public that Russian forces will eventually reclaim these territories after an inevitable crushing victory in eastern Ukraine that will force Ukraine to retreat from Kursk to respond. So in the meantime, the Kremlin is redirecting concerns by focusing attention on humanitarian efforts for the affected residents of Kursk Oblast and has decided not to cancel the upcoming gubernatorial elections, likely in an effort to prevent some sort of panic. Interestingly, while the Kremlin has chosen to press ahead with the Kursk gubernatorial elections, they've quietly postponed local elections in the 7 districts directly impacted by the Ukrainian incursions due to security risks. This decision likely reflects an effort to maintain the appearance of control while quietly managing the crisis. Meanwhile, Russian state media has been busy shifting the focus from the actual battle in Kursk by emphasizing the resilience of Kursk's residents and their support for the Russian war effort. Despite Ukraine grabbing over 1,200 square kilometers of Russian territory, coverage of the incursion has been framed as a limited, low-impact operation by guerrillas, and then sharply contrasting those stories with reports of major Russian advances in other regions, which are being portrayed as significant victories despite being far less successful. I mean, Russia is taking way less territory and losing more people, but Russian media is hyping it up as massive victories, whereas what Ukraine is doing in Kursk is just a minor guerrilla operation. Now, it's clear that the Kremlin is using this messaging campaign to buy time, hoping to address the situation in Kursk Oblast once their objectives in eastern Ukraine are met. Sources indicate that the initial shock and concern over Ukraine's incursion into Kursk Oblast have subsided across Russia, as the advances are far from major population centers. The Kremlin appears confident that the current scale of the conflict in Kursk will persist for months, signaling that they are in no rush to expel Ukrainian forces and are instead prioritizing their offensive in Avdiivka and Bakhmut. That being said, President Putin reportedly set an October 1st deadline for Russian forces to drive Ukrainian troops out of Kursk Oblast, but they must do so without pulling any more resources from the front lines in eastern Ukraine. This tells me that in front of cameras, Putin wants to appear active and decisive, but behind the scenes, he expects a long fight over this Russian territory. As I said before, every day Ukraine is in Russia without Russia taking forceful measures to eject them, it undermines the Kremlin's long-standing narrative that Russia's military actions in Ukraine are all about protecting national sovereignty and territorial integrity. Because if that is what it is about, Putin should be prioritizing getting Ukraine out of Kursk, and he simply is not. So we know that this war is actually about Putin's personal conquest ambitions. So the approach from the Kremlin is to balance the need to address the incursion in Kursk Oblast without destabilizing Putin's regime, without deprioritizing the Eastern Front in Ukraine, or without making drastic changes to his military leadership, which would signal the appearance of instability. As of right now, it seems to be working. There is no signs of a major shakeup within the command structure. There's no signs of protests or discussions about this taking place within the major population centers of Russia, and all of this despite clearly this being a major crisis. Reports also suggest the Kremlin was considering a new mobilization wave, but that idea was quickly shot down due to concerns over labor shortages impacting Russia's already flagging economy. Instead, the Kremlin is likely to rely more heavily on conscripts, which are inadequately trained and equipped to conduct decisive operations against Ukraine. In sum, the Kremlin's handling of the Kursk Oblast situation seems to reflect a broader strategy of maintaining focus on eastern Ukraine while managing domestic perceptions through careful messaging and strategic distractions. How well this strategy will hold remains to be seen, as Ukraine will continue to press the issue with every kilometer they gain and every day they are occupying Kursk Oblast, which once again puts a major spotlight on Putin's lie that Russia actually invaded Ukraine to preserve territorial integrity, and they're not even doing it when Ukraine has invaded them.